What's up guys, Mike here, the Detroit Borg with the Google Play edition of the HTC One and the Galaxy S4. These are sold directly from the Google Play Store, unlocked and at full price. So this is priced at $599 and $649, so the Galaxy is more expensive in this case. You can get a 32 gig version or the 16 gig version, white or white. You can't get the other colors. So that's all you get. You don't have a lot of options here. But you're getting a device, a top-end device running stock Android. These are not Nexus devices, but they will get the updates as soon as the Nexus devices also receive them. So that's one of the great things here. You don't have to wait for carriers or OEMs to push out updates. These will get them. But of course, they're running stock Android, so they're losing all of those features that the OEMs put on them, like AirView and Air Gesture and all those things you're used to with things like the S4. And HTC One loses Zoe and Blink Feed and all those other sort of things. But in terms of specs, these are basically the same phones you can buy on AT&T or T-Mobile in the US. And specifically with the HTC One, it's basically a universal phone here. So we have a 1.7 gigahertz quad-core Snapdragon 600 processor, 2 gigs of RAM, a micro SIM slot. Now that 4.7-inch LCD display with a full 1080p resolution gives us a pretty staggering 468 pixels per inch, one of the highest pixel densities you can get right now. We do have HTC boom sound, so you still have that Beats audio integrated in here with all the Beats audio hardware and programming still preserved here with the stock Android experience. So you get those impressive stereo speakers and the amplifier and everything like that. Now in terms of the camera, we still have that HTC Ultra Pixel camera, which is basically a 4 megapixel camera, but the pixels themselves are much larger, so that's why they call them Ultra Pixels. So they do a better job picking up light, so you get better low light performance. You also get full optical stabilization. You get NFC technology, GPS, a GLONASS, and everything like that. So pretty familiar territory here. So that is the HTC One. Now, onto the Galaxy S4. The S4 again is the quad-core edition, so we get our 1.9 gigahertz quad-core processor, 2 gigs of RAM as well, a 13 megapixel rear-facing camera, 2600 milliamp hour battery, an infrared blaster, a 4G LTE capability here, of course. Now the HTC One also has that infrared blaster built into the button, but of course they're missing the software features that come with the OEM installation, so you have to find an app to use that IR blaster. Now this is running Android, so the Android full stock Android operating system, 5-inch full HD Super AMOLED display. So we get a pretty impressive 1080p display. Alright, so let's go ahead and start with the unboxing of the HTC One here. And you can see it's pretty much the standard box you get for the HTC One. You just get Google branding here this time instead of the carrier branding. Like, for example, you would get the AT&T logo here if you pick this up from AT&T. Let's go ahead and slice this open. We lift the lid. There is our HTC One, very simple, no AT&T branding here or any other branding from another carrier. A little tab here to lift up. There it is, wrapped in its plastic. A little demonstration of how to install the SIM. There's a SIM slot, there's a SIM ejection tool. So you can find all of that under here. So there we go. We got some NFC tags, I believe. We have our HTC SIM ejection tool. We have our IMEI information, your HTC One, warranty statement, safety and regulatory guide. We have some HTC stickers, so we still get those. We have our wall adapter here, so we have our HTC branded wall adapter, glossy black. This allows us to charge the phone. USB. We have our headphones, which kind of look like Beats headphones, but they're not. These are standard HTC headphones with the red ear tips. So there you go, you have some spare ear tips to adjust for your ears. These also have an inline mic and remote. And you can see it's also that sort of ribbon cable, so it makes it less tangled, makes it less likely to tangle rather. We also have our micro USB charging cable. Alright, so let's get to our phone here. So we're just going to peel this up. And slide out our phone. So we have that beautiful aluminum gapless zero gap design with that white plastic bezel with the white seams. Very nice design. I just love the HTC One. High quality materials, that rounded back, that chamfered edge, that mirrors. Very nice, kind of similar to the iPhone 5. We have our micro USB port, a microphone. On the front we have one of our speakers here. We have our off-screen Android controls, so our back button and home button. So you can see there's less buttons with the HTC One. You have your home button, back button. You don't have a menu button or recent apps button. Up top, you have your proximity sensor, ambient light sensor. You also have a little LED notification light behind that speaker grill. You also have your camera here. So I believe this is a 2.2 megapixel camera. So a very high-end camera with a very wide angle lens. On the back, again, that's 4 megapixel or ultra pixel camera with that LED flash. We have our microphone right there. And we also have our Beats audio branding, which is preserved, and you won't find any carrier branding here like you would get with your AT&T version. In fact, if I bring that out here, I can show you. So there you go. It's kind of hard to tell them apart without that AT&T logo on the back. Along the side, you'll find your SIM tray. There's the SIM ejection port, so you can use the SIM ejection tool to eject the tray. The tray is also metal, and I can eject that for you to show you. We have our volume rocker, which is that kind of milled metal, so you can see it's got a nice little texture to it, makes it a little more grippable, a little more feelable. You have your headphone jack, you have your sleep wake button, which also integrates the IR blaster, so you can see it's kind of that clear black plastic. Now with that SIM tray, you have your SIM ejection tool. Just stick it in there, pops right out, slides out. There you go. It doesn't remove, so don't try to remove it. It stays in there and just slide in your micro SIM. So there you go, that is the HTC One. Now let's move on to the Galaxy S4 before we boot it up. So we're going to slide out the sleeve here. So we have a few tabs here to cut. We're going to lift up. There is our Galaxy S4. Again, very simple branding here. You don't find a lot of advertisement on here. You don't see Super AMOLED or NFC or anything like that. So we should be able to tip it out here. There is our phone. Let's just set this aside for just a moment. Take a look at the contents. So we have our Galaxy S4 quick reference guide. Slide this out. You can see Google, Samsung. There you go. Basically shows you about the ports, the buttons, that sort of thing. Health and warranty safety guide. We also have our micro USB charging cable. We have our wall adapter. You can see the side mounted USB port, Samsung branding. We have our ear tips for our headphones. So we have our standard Samsung headphones, again with the inline microphone right there and remote control. And we also have our very large battery here. So again, this contains the NFC technology as well. This is again 2600 milliamp hours. So again, the NFC technology is built into the battery, not the back of the phone. So let's move on to the phone and take a look. So here we go. We're just going to peel off the plastic, wrapping the phone. And we have another panel on front. Lift that up. There you go. Now along the side again, you have these strips of plastic protecting the bezel, so let's go ahead and peel those off as well. And we also have a piece of plastic covering the camera lens, which I notice is often forgotten. I see it's still stuck on a lot of phones. Just peel that off, and there we go. Alright, so there is our GS4, pretty familiar territory here. Samsung branding, LED flash, that 13 megapixel camera with autofocusing, stabilization, 1080p, lots of camera features there. We have our speaker grill back here with that raised bump to make sure it doesn't get covered up when you lay it on the table. You have your micro USB port, your microphone. On the side we have our sleep wake power button. Up top we have our IR blaster right there. Another microphone, noise cancellation microphone, our headphone jack. Along the side, our volume rocker. Along the bottom, we have our home button as well as our menu button and back button. Again, pretty much stock, so stock Samsung. So stock Android does treat these differently, so we'll explore that once we get it booted up. So let's go ahead and peel the back panel off and install the battery. So you can see the panel pops off. Same story here. You have your micro SD card slot and SIM. So that's your SIM, micro SD. Now as you can also see back here, we still have these electrical connections which work with some Samsung accessories, specifically the wireless charger, which I reviewed in a previous video, so this will work with the stock version. We also have our speaker grill down here. So let's go ahead and install our battery. So I'm just going to drop this in and put our cover back on. So in fact, if you look inside the cover, you see just nothing. It's just a thin piece of plastic. Alright, so there you go. Again, it looks exactly like a stock white GS4. You can see we have that pattern to the back panel, that sort of woven pattern. Very nice. You can see it's also on the front. It's a little more pronounced if you have a black GS4, but there you go. I really like that design. I think it actually looks pretty sharp. It is all plastic, but you can see along the edge you kind of have a metal sort of design here. Again, it's just plastic, but they've done a nice job here, I think, with the overall design. I actually really like the GS4. I know it gets picked on a lot because it's made out of plastic, but I think they do a nice job with the material quality as well as the design. Alright, so let's go ahead and boot these up for the first time. I'm just going to tap and hold their power buttons, so they're in different locations. Do a little vibration from the motors. The GS4 seems to boot up a little faster. So we get a little different boot animation here. Looks like the HTC One screen brightness is dialed down a bit. Let's go ahead and select English. You can see the GS4 did start a little quicker. I'm going to skip that. Connect to my Wi-Fi and type in my password, and boy, the HTC One is taking its time. Alright, so I've logged into my Wi-Fi network and we're ready to log into Google. Alright, so I've authenticated my Google account. I'm going to restore from my Google account and keep it backed up. So let's go to next. So it's restoring everything. So it's transferring all my contacts, my passwords, that sort of thing. Even my screen brightness, which you can see just went up. Let's go to next. Alright, so there we go. There is our stock user interface, including my transferred wallpaper. But there is a new wallpaper here, which we're going to quickly activate here so you can see it. So I'm going to go to Live Wallpapers. Sunbeam, so this is phase beam, that is sunbeam, so I'm going to set that as the wallpaper. So that is the default configuration. Let me do that here on the HTC One as well. Live wallpapers, sunbeam, there you go. Now in terms of interface, it's kind of nice to have the home button to wake up the GS4 versus the side button only for the HTC One. But just to show you that this is running Android 4.2.2, this isn't running 4.3 like a lot of us were hoping it would load with, but it's running Android 4.2. So let's just go to Settings, go to About This Phone at the bottom here. You can see Android 4.2.2. So there we go, pretty familiar. So still running the latest version of Android, and once 4.3 comes out, it will get it as well. Now because both these devices have non-stock Android controls here, so for example, we have a home button, we have a menu button, and we have a back button. If you had a Nexus device, you'd have a home button, you'd have a back button, and you'd have a recent apps button. Now in order to launch recent apps, all you have to do is double tap the home button. So there you go, that is recent apps. And you can tap and hold the home button to get to Google Now, which is pretty familiar here. What's the weather like tomorrow in Chicago?
Tomorrow's forecast for Chicago is 75 degrees and clear.
So there you go. Now in terms of the HTC One, same story. Tap and hold the home button to get to Google Now. And double tap the home button to get to the app switcher, or the recent apps. Now the GS4 also has this menu button here, which Nexus devices don't have. The HTC One doesn't have a menu button at all. So both devices handle this a little differently. So if we go to Chrome here, for example, you can see we have the menu control up here on the HTC One. We have it down here on the GS4. So a slight difference there. Now if we go to the lock screen, you can see we can swipe to the right. We get to our widgets. You can keep swiping. You can add more widgets if you want. But you can also swipe to the right to launch the camera. So that allows you to quickly launch the camera app. Now if you go to home, it takes us to the home screen. You swipe down, you can see your notification panel. And you can use the two-finger swipe to get to your quick settings. You can jump to your settings right here. There you go. Now, the only real difference here in terms of settings is if you go to sound here, you see we still have Beats Audio, which you can toggle on and off. The GS4 does not have that. So you do get the benefits of Beats Audio in this phone. Now, although you have Beats Audio processing going on in the background on the stock version of the HTC One, you don't get that little Beats icon in the top here like you do with the full version of the HTC One. Now the camera app has also been redesigned here. So for example, if you want to adjust any of the settings, you just tap anywhere on the screen and you can swipe your finger to any one of them. So for example, if we go to HDR, activate HDR, that's how we do it. Now you see HDR. We can also go to our exposure value and we can cycle between the exposures here. So we're just going to go to the 0. We can also go to our settings for more options. So that's our geolocation, our timer. This is picture size, so we can change the picture, so you can see 13 megapixels there. We also can switch the camera mode, or switch the camera from rear facing to front facing. So let's go back. There we go. Same story with the HTC One. So just tap and hold your finger, go to your exposure, tap and hold to go to flash mode, switch the camera around. So there you go. Works just the same on each device. You can also change these things just by tapping the settings icon here, and it will stay on the screen no matter what you're doing. So, for example, if you tap and hold on the screen, as soon as you lift your finger away, it goes away, so that can be a little annoying for people. So this is a way of quickly accessing those things for you. Now the camera still has those modes here. So for example, we have standard still mode, we have video mode, we have our panorama, and we also have our sphere. So this allows us to take a photosphere just like we're used to with the Nexus devices. Now in terms of benchmark performance, both phones are fairly evenly matched. So if you look at the Antutu benchmark score, you can see that the HTC One does fall behind the GS4 just a little bit. But otherwise they're pretty close. Of course, the HTC One is actually using a lower powered processor, so a 1.7 GHz quad core versus the 1.9 GHz quad core in the GS4. Now in terms of which phone I prefer, it's kind of hard. I really like the display of the HTC One, although it is smaller, 4.7 versus the 5 on the GS4. It's also, this is an OLED display versus that brighter IPS LCD display, which makes this a better phone in bright sunlight. It also provides more accurate colors. Perhaps not as vivid or not as impressive when you're looking at it versus the GS4, but both displays are superb and very sharp and clear. Both phones perform flawlessly with stock Android. They're very quick. There's no lag here. TouchWiz definitely lags a lot on the GS4. It's definitely one of the drawbacks of the GS4 is TouchWiz is just how laggy it is. You get a lot of features, but you get a lot of lag and a lot of stalling, which I don't really care for, but I really like the GS4 hardware. I like the large display. I like the form factor. It's thinner and lighter than the HTC One. I also like the fact that we have a home button here on the front, and I like the positioning of the buttons here. I really don't care for the sleep-wake button positioning on the HTC One. That's something I do get used to over time, but it's definitely not as ergonomic as having it by your thumb here and having the volume rocker on this side like you get with the GS4. So overall, the GS4 just feels more ergonomic. You also get a higher megapixel camera, which although you have the ultra pixel sensor in here, ultra pixel requires a lot more processing than the stock version can provide, so that's something to consider. The 13 megapixel can't go wrong. You do get better low light performance with the HTC One, but generally speaking, you get sharper pictures with the GS4. Now you also have to remember that the GS4 does give you the capability of swapping out the battery, so you can carry a spare battery in case the battery runs down. You do get much better audio quality out of the HTC One. That is a huge benefit here, both over the headphone jack and the speakers. All of that has been preserved with the stock version of Android, so that's great. Definitely a big selling point for me with the HTC One is the audio, and I've thought if the stock version would wipe out those benefits, then that's a big downside, but they don't. They preserve it for the stock version, so that's fantastic. And certainly you get a much higher quality build and design, that nice aluminum construction, zero gap construction, which looks almost perfect on the stock version here. I don't see any gaps like you did with the initial batch of the HTC One when it launched. So very high quality, but generally speaking, the GS4 provides a little more flexibility here. You can expand your own storage, and you can add and swap out your own battery, so that's something to consider. So there are a lot of benefits to both phones. It's hard for me to pick which one, so that's why I have both. I don't have to decide. I have both. I can pick up any one I want. So you can't go wrong. Just pick and decide what things you value the most. If you prefer audio, if you listen to a lot of music, HTC One is the way to go. And if you prefer an accurate display, which is brighter and easier to read outside, definitely the HTC One. But if you want this larger screen, lighter weight form factor, and you want the ability to swap out the battery and add your own storage, the GS4 is the one for you. But otherwise, they're equally matched devices. So that's going to do for me in this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next one.